The sun had long disappeared behind the thick, dark clouds, casting an eerie shadow over the battlefield. The air was heavy with the scent of burning metal and scorched earth. Far in the distance, the sound of explosions echoed, sending tremors through the ground. The enemy had breached the outer defenses of the planet, and their relentless assault seemed unstoppable. Inside a makeshift underground bunker, a group of soldiers huddled together in silence, their faces grim and weary. They had been fighting for days, surviving on little more than rations and adrenaline. Now, their numbers had dwindled. The last remaining survivors were few, and the hope that had once burned bright in their hearts was quickly fading. Commander Rhea stood at the center of the room, her brow furrowed in deep thought. She gazed at the flickering hologram on the wall, a map of the battlefield. It showed the enemy forces advancing in a steady line, closing in on their position. Every strategy they had tried had failed. Every attempt to break the siege had been crushed by the overwhelming might of the invaders. Their weapons, their technology, everything they had relied on, had proven useless against the superior enemy forces. She clenched her fists. "We can't hold out much longer," she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. The room was silent, every person in it fully aware of the gravity of their situation. Lieutenant Darren, who had been at her side throughout the entire campaign, spoke up. "Maybe it's time we consider retreating, Commander. We can still get a few people out of here." Rhea shook her head. "Retreating isn't an option. We don't have anywhere to go. The enemy controls every escape route. If we run, we'll be hunted down. We're trapped here." The soldiers around her exchanged nervous glances. The truth was clear to all of them. They were running out of time, and their options were running out fast. Their enemy wasn't just an invading force. They were an unstoppable machine of war, well-equipped and ruthless. The survivors had tried everything they could think of, but it was never enough. Every plan, every counterattack had been met with overwhelming force. Suddenly, the lights in the bunker flickered, and a loud alarm blared. The sound of enemy ships passing overhead shook the ground, and the walls trembled as the sounds of gunfire reached their ears from above. Rhea's eyes hardened as she turned to face the map again. "They're getting closer," she whispered, almost to herself. "We need a miracle, or we're done." But as if on cue, something unexpected happened. The door to the bunker opened with a hiss, and a soldier hurried inside. He was out of breath, his eyes wide with fear. "Commander," he called urgently, "you need to see this." Rhea shot him a questioning glance but didn't hesitate. "What is it?" The soldier stepped aside, allowing the flickering light from the communication panel to illuminate his face. He looked both excited and terrified. It's an emergency signal, Commander. It's coming from outside our sector." The room fell into an uneasy silence. They had been cut off from the rest of the galaxy for days now, with no way to send or receive any messages. The fact that this signal was coming through, and at such a crucial moment, seemed too good to be true. Rhea didn't waste a second. "Put it through," she ordered. The soldier nodded, and within moments, the screen on the wall blinked to life. The message appeared in large, bold letters. "Emergency response. Deathworlder." Rhea's heart skipped a beat. The name sent a chill down her spine. The Deathworlder. There were rumors, of course. Stories whispered in the shadows about a warrior from a world so dangerous that even the bravest of beings avoided it. A being who was said to fight like no other. A mercenary of sorts, known only for one thing: destruction. But this was no time for hesitation. If there was even a chance that the stories were true, this could be the break they needed. "Is it a trap?" Lieutenant Darren asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "Or is it real?" "We have no choice but to find out," Rhea replied, her tone resolute. "We need every advantage we can get. If this Deathworlder can help us, we take it. If not, then we die trying." The soldiers exchanged uneasy looks, but they knew that their options were dwindling. With their backs against the wall and nothing left to lose, they had no choice but to take the risk. "Prepare the team," Rhea commanded. "We're going after them." The soldiers hurried to gather their gear, but as they did, doubt still lingered in the air. The thought of putting their faith in a stranger, a mercenary, no less, was unsettling. But Rhea knew they were out of options. If the Deathworlder was real, this could be their last chance. As the last of the survivors equipped themselves for the dangerous journey ahead, Rhea stood at the door of the bunker, staring out at the battlefield that stretched beyond the horizon. The enemy was closing in fast. They had no more time to waste. The decision was made. And as she led her team out into the night, a single thought echoed in her mind. This was their last hope. But the fear of ambush, of being caught off guard by the enemy, was heavy in the pit of her stomach. "Unsure," Rhea said finally, her voice firm. "We have no choice." The small group moved faster, driven by a mix of desperation and uncertainty. The night seemed to stretch on forever, with no stars in the sky, only the occasional flicker of distant gunfire or explosions far off in the distance. Just then, a low rumble echoed from the ground. Rhea froze. Her team did the same. The noise wasn't natural, it was rhythmic, like the sound of heavy machinery moving through the earth. It was impossible to tell if it was friend or foe, but whatever it was getting closer. "Take cover," Rhea ordered, her voice barely above a whisper. The team quickly scattered behind the crumbling remnants of a building, crouching low, weapons ready. The rumble grew louder, and then suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet. Rhea's heart raced as she instinctively checked her surroundings, her eyes darting back and forth. She had to make a decision. Was this the Deathworlder they had come to find, or had the enemy somehow tracked them down? The sound grew deafening, and Rhea was almost certain she could feel the tremors in her bones now. "The enemy," she thought. "They found us. We're dead." And then, just as suddenly, the rumble stopped. Silence. The kind of silence that made the air thick with tension. The quiet before a storm, before the chaos erupted. Rhea's pulse quickened, and her eyes scanned the horizon once more. The night was still. Too still. "Get ready," Rhea whispered to her team. "We're about to find out who, or what, is out there." Another sound cut through the air. It wasn't the hum of enemy ships or the blast of artillery. No, it was something far more ominous. A low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate the very ground they stood on. The sound came from behind a ruined wall several meters away. Rhea's instincts kicked in. "Stay down," she ordered. She motioned to the rest of the team to hold their positions. Every muscle in her body screamed for action, but she knew that if they acted too soon, they would be spotted. They had to wait, just a little longer, until they could make out what was coming toward them. The growling intensified, and then, a flash of movement. Something large, something unmistakable, emerged from the shadows. A figure. But it wasn't like anything Rhea had ever seen. The figure moved with a speed that was almost too fast for the human eye to follow. It was massive, its silhouette barely visible in the dim light, but its presence undeniable. Whatever it was, it radiated power. Rhea felt a shiver run down her spine, but she held her ground. The figure approached closer, and for a brief moment, Rhea thought it might be an enemy scout, sent to finish the job. But then she heard a voice. A deep, almost otherworldly voice that sent chills through her entire being. "Commander Rhea," the voice said, calm yet deadly. "I've been waiting for you." Before Rhea could react, the figure stepped fully into view. A massive humanoid, towering over 7 feet tall, with dark, weathered armor covering its form. Its eyes glowed with an eerie, unnatural light, and its movements were smooth, calculated, like a predator sizing up its prey. Rhea felt her breath catch in her throat. This was no ordinary mercenary. This was no ordinary soldier. This was the Deathworlder. And he had come. But was he here to save them, or had they made a terrible mistake? "Let's talk," the Deathworlder said, his voice booming in the quiet night. "And I'll decide if your fate is worth saving." The team exchanged uneasy glances, But Rhea stood tall. They had no choice but to trust this warrior, no matter how terrifying he appeared. There was no turning back now. "Lead the way," Rhea replied, trying to steady her voice. The Deathworlder gave a slight nod and turned toward the desolate horizon. It was time to fight back. The war was far from over. But now, they had a chance. The world outside was dark and quiet. The wind howled through the desolate land, carrying with it the faint sound of distant explosions. It was a place of death and despair. But perhaps, just perhaps, the Deathworlder was their chance to survive. The underground bunker door sealed behind them with a sharp hiss, the metallic sound reverberating through the quiet air. Rhea's boots crunched on the gravel as she led her small group of survivors through the barren landscape. The war-torn planet stretched out in front of them, once a thriving world full of hope and life, now reduced to rubble. The wind whipped around them, carrying ash and dust from the crumbling buildings in the distance. It was almost as if the planet itself was grieving, mourning its inevitable demise. The war had ravaged every corner of the once proud city, and the soldiers who remained had nowhere left to go. The message from the mysterious Deathworlder had arrived just in time, or had it? Was this a desperate plea for help or some sort of cruel joke? Rhea couldn't afford to second-guess herself. Not now. Not with so little hope left. "We're getting close," Rhea muttered, adjusting the rifle slung across her shoulder. The team moved quietly, staying close to the ground, and using the shadows for cover. Every step felt like it could be their last, but there was no turning back. They had one chance to reach this enigmatic savior, and if they failed, they would be wiped out. It was as simple as that. Lieutenant Darren, who had been walking beside Rhea, glanced at her with a worried expression. "You sure this is the right move, Commander?" She didn't answer at first. Instead, her eyes were fixed ahead, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The tension in the air was palpable. They weren't alone. Not yet, anyway. The Deathworlder's footsteps were heavy on the cracked earth as he led the team deeper into the ruined city. Rhea couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The air was thick with tension, and her instincts told her that this was just the beginning. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. The night sky above was dim, the stars hidden by thick clouds of smoke. The stench of burned metal and chemicals hung in the air, a constant reminder of the destruction that had consumed this once thriving world. Rhea's mind raced with questions. What did this towering figure want? Was he here to help, or was he simply another piece in a much larger game? The Deathworlder, however, didn't seem to care for pleasantries. He moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the ruins for any sign of danger, his every movement swift and precise. Despite his intimidating presence, there was something oddly reassuring about his confidence. He wasn't afraid. Rhea's team followed close behind, weapons at the ready, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. The silence between them was deafening, but Rhea didn't mind. She had learned long ago that silence often spoke louder than words. And right now, it was speaking of something much larger, something far beyond their understanding. They reached the outskirts of the city's shattered central district, a place where the last remnants of civilization had once stood. A fortress-like structure loomed in the distance, the Deathworlder's destination. "Is this where we're going?" Lieutenant Darren asked, his voice filled with doubt as he looked at the fortress. The Deathworlder didn't turn to respond. His focus remained on the path ahead. "This is where you'll find your answers," he replied, his voice low and cold, like the growl of a predator. Rhea nodded, though unease settled in her gut. They had come so far, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something they didn't fully understand. Was this some kind of trap? Could they really trust this stranger? Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but she had no choice but to follow him. As they neared the entrance, the massive doors of the fortress creaked open, revealing a dark, cavernous interior. The walls were lined with strange symbols and designs, none of which Rhea recognized. The air inside was thick, heavy with the scent of something metallic, perhaps old blood or something far worse. The Deathworlder led them inside, his boots echoing loudly in the empty hall. Rhea's team followed cautiously, weapons raised but eyes wary. The walls seemed to close in around them as they ventured deeper into the fortress, and the hairs on the back of Rhea's neck stood on end. This was no ordinary stronghold. It felt ancient, like it had stood long before the war. "Stay sharp," Rhea muttered to her team, but her voice was barely audible over the sound of their footsteps. They reached a large open chamber at the heart of the fortress, a room that seemed almost alive with energy. A large stone table sat in the center, surrounded by flickering torches that cast long shadows across the room. The Deathworlder came to a halt before the table, his eyes scanning the dimly lit space as if searching for something. Rhea exchanged a glance with Lieutenant Darren, her unease growing. There was something here, something beyond the Deathworlder's words, beyond the destruction they had seen on this planet. It felt like the calm before a storm. The Deathworlder turned to face Rhea, his glowing eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "I have brought you here for a reason," he said, his voice low but commanding. "The war you've been fighting, it is nothing compared to what is coming. You are standing on the precipice of something much larger than this planet, larger than your people." Rhea took a cautious step forward, her mind racing. "What do you mean?" The Deathworlder's gaze hardened, and for a moment, Rhea thought she saw a flicker of something. Regret. Fear. But it was gone in an instant. He turned away, staring at the ancient symbols etched into the walls of the chamber. "The war you are fighting is only the beginning," he continued. "You have been blind to what is coming for far too long. The true enemy, the one you've been fighting against, was never your real threat. The real threat comes from the stars." Rhea's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? What's out there?" The Deathworlder's lips curled into a grim smile. "A force so powerful, so ancient, that it will devour entire worlds. And your people are the key to stopping it." Rhea's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of his words. Was this some kind of elaborate manipulation? Or was this truth? The thought that something even worse could be coming, something that could destroy not only their world, but the entire galaxy, seemed impossible. But as she looked into the Deathworlder's eyes, she realized he wasn't lying. He believed every word. "What do we need to do?" she asked, her voice steady, though inside, her mind was racing. The Deathworlder nodded slowly. "You will have to face the darkness, Commander. And you will need more than just an army to defeat it. You will need to become something more than human. Only then will you stand a chance." Rhea took a deep breath. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't just about saving this planet anymore. It was about something far greater. The storm was coming. And now, Rhea was part of it. The fate of their world, and perhaps the galaxy, rested on their shoulders. But could they survive the battle ahead? Could they trust this Deathworlder to lead them through it? The tension in the room thickened, and Rhea knew that their next move would decide everything. The war they had known was over, but what lay ahead would change everything forever. The Deathworlder's words echoed in her mind. "You will need to become something more than human." And Rhea had no idea what that truly meant. The heavy silence in the fortress hall seemed to stretch on forever. Rhea's mind raced as the Deathworlder's words lingered in her thoughts, refusing to let her settle. The weight of his revelation pressed on her like a crushing wave. She had been preparing for war, for battle with the enemies her people knew all too well. But this was something else entirely. "I don't understand," Rhea said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, the questions bubbling up uncontrollably. "You're asking us to change everything we know, to become something more than human. What does that even mean?" The Deathworlder's gaze was unwavering. He studied her as though weighing her very soul. His alien eyes gleamed with the intensity of ancient knowledge that was clearly beyond her comprehension. "It means transcending your limitations," he said, his voice as cold as the stone beneath their feet. "The very nature of your species binds you. But in order to face the true enemy, you must evolve, change, adapt. What you know now is not enough." The room seemed to grow colder, as though the very air itself was rejecting his words. Rhea's team shifted uncomfortably behind her, unsure of how to react, what to think. Some of them exchanged quick, nervous glances, their expressions filled with doubt. The silence stretched on, and Rhea felt the weight of every second passing, every thought racing through her mind. Could they really do this? Could they abandon everything they knew, everything that made them human, to face an enemy none of them had ever encountered? "How?" Rhea finally asked. Her voice was steady, but inside, her heart was pounding. "How do we become more than human?" The Deathworlder's lips parted slightly, revealing a flash of something. Determination, perhaps, or the deep understanding that what he was asking was impossible for most. "Still," he continued, unshaken. "There are ancient technologies," he said, his voice lowering. "Weapons, artifacts, and knowledge buried beneath the surface of this planet. But they are not just tools. They are tests. Tests that only the strongest of your kind can survive. If you succeed, you will become more than what you are. You will be the weapon that can fight the darkness coming for your galaxy." Rhea took a slow, careful step forward, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts. The thought of using ancient technology, of turning her people into something else entirely, felt wrong. It felt like surrendering their humanity. And yet, she knew what the Deathworlder said was true. The forces they were about to face were beyond anything they had ever encountered. The choice hung heavy in the air. This wasn't just about the survival of her planet. This wasn't just about winning a war against a foreign enemy. This was something far greater, something that could change the course of the universe itself. Rhea glanced at Lieutenant Darren, who stood beside her, his hand gripping the hilt of his weapon with white knuckles. His eyes met hers, filled with uncertainty and confusion. But there was something else, something that mirrored what she felt. The fear of the unknown. "What if we fail?" Darren's voice was quiet, but his words cut through the tension like a blade. The Deathworlder didn't flinch, didn't even acknowledge the fear in Darren's voice. "Failure is not an option," he said flatly. "If you fail, everything you know will be lost. Your world, your people, the galaxy." Rhea exhaled sharply, the weight of his words settling in. Failure meant death, not just for them, but for everyone. Her people would be wiped out, crushed under the weight of an unstoppable force. The weight of that responsibility nearly made her knees buckle. Could she truly make this decision? Could she lead her people into something so dangerous, so unknown? "I need time," she said finally, her voice trembling with the strain of her decision. "I need time to think." "You do not have time," the Deathworlder replied. "The darkness will not wait. Your world is already in danger. The countdown has begun. Once you are ready, you will face the trials of the ancients. If you succeed, you will stand a chance. If you fail..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Rhea swallowed hard, her mind racing. What choice did they have? What choice did she have? The galaxy was on the brink of annihilation, and it seemed the only way to survive was to take the Deathworlder's offer, to embrace something unnatural, something she could barely comprehend. Her gaze lingered on the Deathworlder, and she could see the silent expectation in his eyes. He had given them no room for doubt, no room for hesitation. "I'll do it," Rhea said, her voice firm despite the turmoil inside her. "We'll do it." Darren and the rest of the team looked at her, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and fear, but no one spoke up. The decision had been made. They had no choice but to follow. The Deathworlder nodded once, a single silent acknowledgement of her resolve. "Then prepare yourselves. The trials begin soon." As the Deathworlder turned and strode toward the darkened depths of the fortress, Rhea felt a sinking feeling in her gut. She had just chosen a path that would change her, her team, and everything they stood for. There was no going back. They were about to enter a war for the future of the galaxy, and the stakes were higher than they could ever have imagined. And in that moment, Rhea knew that the true battle wasn't just against the unknown enemy. It was against everything they had ever believed in. The journey ahead would force them to confront their darkest fears and their deepest desires. It was a path that none of them were ready for, but it was the only path left. The countdown had begun. Rhea stood at the threshold of the ancient chamber, her heart pounding in her chest. The air around her felt thick with anticipation, heavy with the weight of the decision she had just made. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but she couldn't afford the luxury of doubt now. There was no turning back. The Deathworlder's words echoed in her mind as she glanced over her shoulder at the rest of her team. Lieutenant Darren stood beside her, his expression unreadable. His hand gripped the hilt of his weapon with a death-like intensity, though his eyes betrayed the fear he was desperately trying to hide. The others, too, were a mix of anxiety and resolve. They all knew what they were about to face was unlike anything they had ever encountered. "You ready?" Darren asked, his voice low and strained. Rhea didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath, trying to center herself. She had to remain calm for her team, for everyone. They were about to enter a trial that could change the fate of the galaxy. The path ahead would test them in ways they could not even begin to imagine. "I have no choice," she said quietly, her voice steady. "None of us do." With that, she turned and pushed open the heavy door, revealing a vast, shadowed chamber beyond. Strange symbols were etched into the walls, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. It felt as though the very air in this room held the secrets of the Ancient Ones. "Proceed," the Deathworlder's voice echoed from the shadows. His figure, barely visible in the gloom, moved like a specter, leading them into the heart of the unknown. Rhea and her team stepped forward, each of them tense, their eyes scanning their surroundings for any sign of danger. The floor beneath them seemed to hum with energy, as if the ancient technology beneath their feet was awakening, ready to test them. Suddenly, the walls began to shimmer, and the symbols on them flared to life. Bright, pulsating lights filled the room, and a low, rumbling sound reverberated through the chamber. The temperature dropped sharply, and Rhea could see her breath in the air, as if winter had come early. The Deathworlder's voice broke the silence again. But this time, it was different. It held a sense of finality, as though they were crossing into a realm from which there would be no return. "The trials begin now. You will face tests of strength, will, and mind. If you succeed, you will gain the power to fight what is coming. If you fail—" He paused, and for the first time, Rhea caught a flicker of emotion in his eyes. "There will be no second chance." A deep shudder ran through Rhea as she turned to her team. Darren gave her a tight nod, his jaw clenched. The others seemed to steel themselves as well, but none of them looked at ease. They were stepping into the unknown, into a fate they had no way of controlling. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and suddenly the air was filled with the sound of shifting gears, mechanical whirs, and ancient mechanisms springing to life. From the walls, massive stone slabs slid open, revealing dark, cavernous spaces. Unseen forces seemed to be moving, manipulating the room as if it had a mind of its own. "We must move quickly," the Deathworlder urged, his voice now sharp. "The first trial is upon you." Before anyone could ask what that meant, the ground cracked open in front of them. A massive, hulking creature emerged from the darkness, its eyes glowing red and its teeth long and jagged like the blades of 1,000 swords. It was a monstrous, towering figure, its muscles rippling with raw power. It roared in fury, the sound deafening, shaking the very walls. Rhea's heart skipped a beat. She had trained for combat. Yes, even fought wars. But nothing had ever prepared her for a beast like this. The creature was unlike anything she had ever seen. It wasn't just a test of strength, it was a test of everything they had. The Deathworlder stepped back into the shadows, his presence fading like a wisp of smoke. "The clock is ticking," he called out. "You have one chance. Defeat it or fail. Your people's survival depends on you." Rhea turned to her team, her voice commanding. "Get ready. We fight together." Before she could say another word, the creature lunged forward, its claws slashing through the air with terrifying speed. Darren was the first to react, firing his weapon, but the beast's thick hide barely flinched. "Fall back," Rhea shouted, taking charge as she drew her own weapon. Her heart raced, but there was no time for fear. She could feel the pressure building inside her chest, the weight of her people's fate resting on her shoulders. This was the moment. As the creature charged again, Rhea moved swiftly, narrowly dodging its claws. She wasn't sure how much longer they could hold their ground. The thing was relentless, its strength far beyond anything they had ever faced. But Rhea was determined. She had made her choice. There was no turning back. In the heat of battle, she realized that this wasn't just a physical fight. It was a test of willpower, of their resolve. The ancient trial had already begun to shape them into something more than human. And this creature, this monster, was merely the first of many obstacles they would have to face. The creature roared once more, and Rhea knew that they were only just beginning. The real battle was about to begin, and every decision they made from here on out would determine whether they had the strength to face the coming darkness. The battle raged on, its ferocity unparalleled by anything Rhea had encountered in her years of service. The creature's blood-curdling roars shook the very foundation of the chamber, and its claws tore through the air with terrifying precision. Yet, with every blow, Rhea's resolve only grew stronger. This was the moment she had trained for, the moment to prove her team's worth, to prove that humanity's will was not easily broken. The beast swung its massive arm once again, and Rhea barely managed to roll out of the way. Her heart was pounding in her chest, but she couldn't afford the luxury of fear. This creature had to be defeated if they were to move on to the next trial. She could feel the weight of the Deathworlder's warning still fresh in her mind. Failure wasn't an option. "Form a circle. Protect the rear," she yelled to her team. Darren and the others quickly took their positions, surrounding the creature. They were still recovering from the initial shock, but they were fighting as one, a single force, united by purpose. But the creature wasn't done yet. With a terrifying screech, it lunged forward, its jaws snapping shut with deadly force. Darren barely managed to dodge, but the creature's claw grazed his shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground with a sickening thud. "Darren!" Rhea shouted, but there was no time for hesitation. The creature was closing in again, and she couldn't afford to let it take another one of her team. Rhea's mind raced. She needed a plan, a strategy. She couldn't just rely on brute force alone. She had to outsmart the beast. She spotted a control panel in the corner of her eye, partially obscured by the shadows. It was ancient, covered in dust and grime, but there was no mistaking its significance. She could feel the power coursing through the room, pulsing like a heartbeat. The room itself was alive, a part of the trial. And if she could control it, "Cover me," she yelled, and without waiting for a response, she darted towards the panel. The creature, furious and relentless, tried to swipe at her, but Darren, despite the pain from his injury, fired at its eyes. It howled in anger, momentarily distracted. Rhea reached the control panel, her fingers trembling as she tried to make sense of the archaic technology before her. She had no idea what it did, but there was only one way to find out. With a final glance over her shoulder to make sure her team was holding their ground, she slammed her hand down on a glowing button. The room shifted. The creature suddenly froze, its monstrous frame locking in place as if paralyzed by an unseen force. Rhea's heart raced. She had no idea what had just happened, but she couldn't afford to waste the opportunity. Without a moment's hesitation, she grabbed her weapon and rushed forward, determined to end this fight. Darren, still recovering, limped to her side, his eyes full of gratitude. "You did it," he said, panting. "You stopped it." Rhea didn't answer. She was too focused on the creature, which was now trapped in place, its massive form unable to move. She could hear it growling, struggling against whatever force had bound it. But the trial wasn't over. The beast was only the first challenge. The real test would be how they would handle the next trial, the one they could not yet see. The floor beneath their feet rumbled once again, and the walls began to shift. The ancient mechanisms of the room were waking up. A low hum filled the air, and a dark, swirling vortex appeared in the center of the chamber. It was not a portal, but something far worse, a manifestation of the trial to come. "This is it," Rhea whispered, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "The final test." Darren nodded, his expression grim but determined. The creature's body had already dissolved into mist, vanishing into the ether as if it had never existed. The room was silent now, the eerie hum of the vortex the only sound. Rhea felt it, felt the pull of the darkness, the weight of the coming challenge. She turned to her team, meeting each of their eyes. They had fought as one, and they would continue to do so. There was no turning back now. "This is our moment," Rhea said, her voice unwavering. "We're not just fighting for ourselves anymore. We're fighting for the entire galaxy." The vortex in front of them swirled violently, its energy threatening to tear the room apart. The Deathworlder's voice echoed through the chamber, colder than ever. "You have survived the first test, but now you will face the ultimate challenge. Only the strongest will survive." Rhea swallowed hard. She had no idea what lay beyond the swirling darkness, but one thing was certain. She and her team would fight with everything they had. There was no other choice. The fate of their people, of the galaxy, depended on it. With a final glance at her team, she stepped toward the vortex. The others followed her without hesitation, their weapons drawn, ready for whatever awaited them on the other side. The trial had only just begun. The swirling vortex opened wide, pulling them into its dark embrace. There was no telling what awaited them on the other side. One moment, they were standing together in the cold, ancient chamber, and the next, they were transported into a new world entirely, a desolate wasteland, bathed in an eerie red glow. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of sulfur and the crackling energy that lingered in the atmosphere. Rhea's heart pounded in her chest as she surveyed the barren landscape. Nothing moved. The ground beneath their feet was cracked, the earth scorched, as if something had torn through it in the distant past. Above, the sky was filled with swirling clouds, red and black, lightning flashing across the heavens like some sort of celestial battle. "This place, it's not natural," Darren muttered, his voice barely audible in the heavy air. He gripped his weapon tighter, his instincts on high alert. "We're not just fighting for our survival anymore. This is a test of everything, of who we are." Rhea nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. They were no longer just participants in a trial. They were facing an enemy more powerful than anything they had encountered. This wasn't just about physical strength or strategy anymore. This was about willpower, about standing firm in the face of an overwhelming force. The ground trembled beneath their feet, a low rumble that grew louder by the second. From the horizon, a dark shape began to form. Slowly, it took the shape of a towering creature, its body made of swirling black mist, with glowing red eyes that pierced through the gloom. Its form shifted and changed with every step it took, as if it were both there and not there at the same time.